let me go back, directly, to the opening remarks. And please let me invite Ms. Judith Karl, the Executive Secretary of UNCDF, for the opening remarks on the role of UNCDF on inclusive and resilient economies in the digital era.
Thank you so much, Francois, and greetings to everybody. Of course, a very unusual year for all of us, and I hope everybody is keeping safe and healthy. And it's a real joy to be able to join all of you on this virtual platform at this incredibly important event. UNCDF aims to make public and private finance work for the 47 least developed countries in the world. And so it's very much my pleasure to welcome you to our series of sessions on building inclusive and resilient economies in the digital era, which we're hosting in partnership with the Singapore FinTech Festival, as Francois said, the largest gathering of its kind in the world. This series comprises over 30 sessions in multiple cities, so hats off to Francois and the team for such a big endeavor, with discussions on inclusive digital economies and financial health. To kick off, we've organized this main session with the goal of inviting all of you, the representatives of fintech companies, banks, telcos, technology companies, microfinance institutions, ministries, regulators, donors, and our peer UN agencies to join us in discussing how we can build a digital economy that works for the poor. Before hearing from this very esteemed panel of speakers, I'd like to share some lessons from our own journey so far. First, let me say a few things about UNCDF and our digital strategy. The work of UNCDF is about creating pathways for excluded populations to gain a foothold in the mainstream financial systems that will help them lead more resilient and secure lives, and to show the markets that it isn't just viable, but it is also good business. Our work has resulted in over 18 million people in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific accessing and using digital financial systems that will help them lead more resilient and secure lives. And to show them increasingly, we've been hearing from citizens and our government partners in 28 least developed countries that an inclusive economy is more important than ever, especially in the context of COVID-19. So we launched the UNCDF Inclusive Digital Economy Strategy 2 years ago to ensure that people are not only able to access digital financial services, but they can engage in the economy more broadly to meet their daily needs and to improve their skills, productivity, and marketability in the digital age. So I believe our strategy is important really for three big reasons. First, entire sectors are digitalizing. Sectors of vital importance to marginalized people are transitioning to digital platforms. For example, farmers can now digitally access agronomic advice, pre-order high-quality seeds remotely, secure better terms for loans, and access market information through mobile phones. Second, because digital financial services are the on-ramp to the digital economy. Digital financial services allow people to pay and get paid on these platforms, unlocking their ability to participate economically. For example, the same farmer can now secure input credit for high-quality seeds on digital platforms by linking payments to a mobile money account. And third, because participation on these digital platforms can mean the difference between resilience and poverty for an individual or an entrepreneur. For our farmer, this would mean the difference between earning more or falling deeper into poverty. It's critical to ensure that marginalized groups such as refugees, women, migrants and youth, MSMEs and rural communities can fully participate on these emerging digital platforms. And yet these groups are often denied the opportunity to benefit from digital transformation due to social norms, societal status, and limited revenue and capacity. So for this reason, UNCDF's strategy is about advancing digital economies that leave no one behind. To fulfill that vision, we are expanding our work with the financial and digital services industry to support inclusive innovation that expands digital and financial services to excluded groups, to build open and interoperable digital infrastructure and to improve the skills of marginalized people. We also partner with governments to create the necessary policies and regulation to foster inclusive digital finance and economic participation. And we work closely with other UN agencies like UNDP, UNCTAD, the World Food Program, UNICEF, and UNHCR, to name a few, to fully leverage these digital services in their work as well. As the co-host of the Secretariat of the UN Secretary General's Task Force on Digital Financing of the Sustainable Development Goals, UNCDF is also committed to work with UNDP and other partners to harness the potential of digital innovation to contribute to the financing of the SDGs. One approach that we are jointly pursuing, based on the recommendations of the task force report entitled People's Money, Harnessing Digitalization to Finance a Sustainable Future, is to support national planning processes that integrate SDG priorities and digital financing innovations in both the public and the private spheres. Rebuilding better post-COVID-19 will require the expansion and innovative use of digital technologies aligned with government's SDG priorities. And we believe our collaboration with UNDP can play an important role in contributing to this agenda. From our digital work across 28 least developed countries, here are a few insights that I'd like to share that I believe are relevant to this session. First, the digital transformation of financial inclusion is accelerating. 5.2 billion people already have a phone, and another 600 million people are expected to have one over the next 5 years. This increase is expected mostly in Africa and Asia. Over 690 million people have gained access to formal financial service worldwide through a mobile phone. UNCDF has accelerated the growth of digital financial services in LDCs. For example, we supported the growth of mobile money in Benin to reach 40% of adults, up from 2%. We enabled similar growth in Nepal, Senegal, Malawi, Uganda, Zambia, and several countries in the Pacific. Critical to our success, here were our financial instruments, deep technical expertise, and our hands-on approach across the public and private sectors, which allowed us to bring stakeholders together to discuss and create an enabling environment for innovations to flourish. Second, inclusion in the digital era is not a given, but it can be achieved. There's still a lot to do. 1 billion adults have a phone, but still do not have financial services. Distinct groups are still underserved. Women still trail men by 9 percentage points in terms of account ownership. These are barriers we can overcome. For example, this gender gap can be reduced by selecting and training female mobile money agents to serve women. To seize opportunities like this in our new strategy, we place inclusion at the center of our digital economy work. For us, this starts by working with our government partners to help them track the digital divide among marginalized groups. To do so, we have developed the Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard, which is a policy tool that governments can use to help set the priorities for their country's inclusive digital transformation. This tool is now being rolled out in 20 countries. Third, linking digital financial services to platforms in key sectors helps people meet their daily needs, improve their skills, productivity, and marketability. We see huge opportunities for businesses to serve those being left behind. New business models are emerging in a range of sectors, from agriculture, energy, education, entrepreneurship, and health to transport, targeting previously excluded populations with affordable and accessible services. To forge deep linkages between digital finance and these sectors, it takes a dedicated and country-focused approach to bring the pieces together. For example, in Uganda, by facilitating an advisory group that includes the private sector, public sector, and donors, we're able to jointly identify the barriers holding back collective success. This has led us to work with pioneering fintech companies to make it easier for key sectors to use digital financial services through integration and commercial agreements known as open APIs. Here I've touched on a few examples of how UNCDF equips marginalized groups to participate in a digital economy. This work involves many valued partners who are attending this festival this week. To ensure that no one is left behind in the digital era, we have to expand this work together. This is critical for all countries to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The festival is an opportunity to learn and share experience on how placing inclusion at the center is a pathway to growth for the digital economy. It is an opportunity for us to discuss, what do citizens want from their digital economy? What will it take for the private sector to build these services? And will they? What is needed to create the enabling conditions and to empower citizens? Our collective achievement of a vision where no one is left behind in the digital era depends on the answers to these questions. We have a great, exciting panel with us today, and I thank you very much for your participation. Back to you, Francois.
Thank you, Judith, for these really opening and inspiring remarks. And let me highlight and come back to one of the sentences that you mentioned at the end of your speech. So you mentioned that the festival is an opportunity to learn and share experience on how placing inclusion at the center is a pathway to grow for the digital economy. And I think this sentence is a perfect segue to introduce our keynote speakers. Ms. Paula Ingabire, the Minister of ICT and Innovation of Rwanda. The Minister will share with us how Rwanda has placed inclusion at the center of its digital transformation. So let me introduce Ms. Paula Ingabire. So she introduced herself as a Rwandan technology enthusiast who currently serves as the Minister of ICT and Innovation of the government of Rwanda. She also coordinated the creation of Smart Africa, that seek really to leverage broadband infrastructure as a driver for Africa's socioeconomic growth. And in 2019, she was named by Apolitical amongst the top 20 of the world's 100 most influential people in digital government. So please let me invite the Ministry of ICT and Innovation of Rwanda for a keynote speech on digital transformation and inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Francois Kupien, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be joining you and delivering remarks today as we convene to deliberate around building inclusive and resilient economies in the digital era. I want to start off by also thanking the organizers, the United Nations Capital Development Fund and the Singapore FinTech Festival, for bringing us all together. Without a doubt, the timeliness of such conversations cannot be emphasized given the current crisis that we all find ourselves in the midst of the raging COVID-19 pandemic and the urgent need to minimize its effects while we prepare for recovery. But just like every storm has a silver lining, digitization has been one of the pandemic's silver linings. Communities across the world have had to rely on some form or combination of digital technologies to cope and curb the virus. More pressing today is the urgent need to identify digital technologies that will shorten the recovery process. Digital transformation agendas across the world have been fast-tracked thanks to COVID, and that has been, and the COVID itself has underscored just how critical inclusion in the digital economy is to financial inclusion and financial security. Digital payments today have enabled economic relief packages to be delivered to those that have been hit hard by the pandemic. We've also been able to leverage all these digital payment methods, especially in the developing and emerging world, buying and purchasing of goods and services. And all these efforts during this time have driven us an edge into the cashless economy. However, for us to arrive at that cashless economy that we also desire to be in, inclusion of digital payments, access to infrastructure, digital literacy have to be at the heart of our digitization efforts. Inclusive and resilient digital economies must cater for the needs and relevance of all classes of the society, and this will include marginalized groups within our respective societies. But one important category to also cater for is the small and medium enterprises, who for many of our developing and emerging economies are the backbone, employing the majority of vulnerable and marginalized groups of our society that have been hit hard And these SMEs ought to be given attention as we design economic recovery interventions. For many of our countries, we've put in place, regulatory measures to ease doing business for these SMEs. But I think what still remains a challenge is the ability to access financing for many of these SMEs. Traditional financing and lending models have not been effective for the longest time and will continue to be a barrier for our SMEs and for their growth. So we ought to be thinking about innovative financing instruments that can leverage digital technologies, financing instruments that are tailored to specific SME needs, as well as their maturity levels, as a means to boost their access to financial services while also boosting economic recovery. So that said, as we meet today and over the next few days to really deliberate on how we can leverage digital transformation as we go into recovery, on how we can build our resilient economies, I hope that all of us collectively can think about the kind of partnerships that are so necessary and critical for us to unlock the potential for these SMEs, to unlock the potential for access to finance for the marginalized groups within our societies, the kind of partnerships that are going to be critical to give us these innovative digital payment channels that we all need to unlock today. The other point that I'd like to raise, also raise is also thinking about the culture of saving that we need to really instill. And for many countries that have already mobilized, their communities to start to think about domestic savings, to think about how they can be financially sustainable in the midst of the shocks that we all have to face today and going forward and for future recoveries. And digital is always going to be a tool that is essential in how we can be able to enable saving at the tips of everyone's fingers. The Inclusive Digital Economy Scorecard that has been developed by the UNCDF talks about leaving no one behind in the digital era. So does the Broadband Commission agenda, which is really around connectivity infrastructure, which is around digital literacy, that all is also focused on how do we not leave anyone behind. And today statistics show us that half the population of the world is still unconnected. So how do we unlock this potential to digital financing mechanisms when we still have a large portion of our communities still not connected to the internet? And so as we design all these interventions, we need to have very holistic plans, a whole of the system type of planning and resource mobilizing and investments that are not just going to unlock the potential for digital innovations in fintech, but also going to think about the ability to build digital literacy for our citizens to be able to use these tools, being able to think about infrastructure, last mile connectivity that is affordable and accessible by everyone across the world in all corners, rural populations, most importantly. And so I know that for many of us that are convened here today, there's a lot that has been unlocked. There's so many achievements that we've registered, whether it's from the corporate world or from the governments. A lot of it would not have been possible without the strong willingness and partnerships of corporates and the government, without the investments in the already existing digital infrastructure that we have, but also the level of digitization that is happening in other segments of the economy, healthcare, education. And so it's really a matter of how do we leverage the already existing investments, efforts, and achievements that we have today to unlock this potential. I want to end off by inviting everyone to take the opportunity during this event to network, to share best practices, so that as we think about inclusion, it's not just specific to our jurisdictions, but it's inclusion for the global family that we are today. Thank you very much.